Good evening and welcome. Welcome to the first project conversation series organized by the American Institute of Architects in Hong Kong. My name is Su Chang and I am the chair of the programs committee of AIA Hong Kong this year. It has been quite a challenge for me to come up with a brief introduction for both our speakers tonight, not only because they each wear multiple hats, architects, curators, educators, writers, filmmakers, or community builders that they would like to call themselves. But together they have also been endeavoring to expand the fields for architects and connecting dots across the design industry in, around, and beyond Hong Kong. And also in the past several months, I also have had the privilege to observe and follow the ways they each work. And tonight finally had the opportunity to see how they together will work as a team and partnership to create meaningful relationship between their projects and their practice. That's also the spirit of the series when we first initiated. So Marisa Yu is an AIA architect member and a founding partner of ESKYIU. She is an architect who integrates design, culture, and spatial agency into her work. She has been examining issues relating to the cultural landscape of Hong Kong since 2000. Besides her multiple researches and writings, she also served as the chief curator of 2009 Hong Kong Shenzhen Bi-City Biennale of Urbanism Architecture, curating more than 80 exhibitions and spearheading creative events at the West Kowloon Cultural District waterfront. Marisa was educated at Columbia and Princeton, and she is a licensed architect in the state of New York and an associate member of the ESKYIU. Recently, she has also been instrumental in establishing the Design Trust, an initiative of Hong Kong Ambassador of Design, as a co-founder. In 2016, Marisa became the executive director and lead curator of the Design Trust Future Studio cultural and community programs, leading the growth of its associated grants research projects in Hong Kong and Greater Bay Area, as well as internationally. Eric Schuldenfrei is an associate member of the IA and a founding partner of ESKYIU, focuses on the evolving relationship between architecture, animation, technology, and art. Eric was educated at Cornell and received a Master of Philosophy from the University of Cambridge. He completed his PhD at Cambridge with a dissertation titled Architecture and the Moving Image, which led to the films of Charles and Ray Eames, a universal sense of expectation that focuses on architecture, politics, cinema, and education. Eric also served as curator for exhibition, education, film, and media for the 2009 Hong Kong Shenzhen Bi-City Biennale of Urbanism and Architecture at the West Kowloon site. And currently, Eric is the head of the Department of Architecture at the University of Hong Kong. And tonight, after Eric and Marisa's presentation, they will be joined by Evelyn Ting and Paul Zhe, partners of Hong Kong-based studio New Orbis Works, and also two very active members of AIA Hong Kong. And we will have a conversation together, and then also we welcome questions and comments from our audience during and after the presentation. Now, Eric and Marisa, you can start whenever you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Su Chang, and also Paul and Evelyn. Very excited to see all of you, and Florence for inviting us, the president of AIA Hong Kong. I was earlier just sharing with everyone, Eric and I do wear lots of different hats, but also have not sat together in a public format lecture since 2016. So that's 6 years ago. So very exciting to have these moments to retrospectively think about our past, our journey, and creative practice, but at the same time, question what first projects mean. We continually say we never do projects twice, and so we do see everything we are doing always first. And maybe we can unpack why and how we have been exploring. But essentially, our lives are intertwined. We're always thinking about how we are, nurtured by certain backgrounds or how we are shaped by our community and culture. We also are highly cognizant that opportunities that are given to us or we ask for actually also can transform and allows us to go beyond the discipline. And so it's been a real humbling honor, to be honest, to have many amazing people along the way help us. It's just not just us, but we also believe in this true spirit of giving and generosity that aligns the work we're going to share on, whether it's philanthropy to community building, or even just rolling up our sleeves and trying new things. I think that's the spirit of what we want to share today. Just as we think about the series, we understand there's been a lot of amazing people who've spoken before and also future-wise. But we've been trying to map out to share through this slide the overlaying roles that we play, but also the opportunities that we will share through this journey as a practice, both composed of a multidisciplinary viewpoint, how we look at the built environment, how we actually actively shape the environment, and how the environment also can make us think of how design can go beyond itself in one sense. So we've always actually thought of the ESKYIU practice as a way to integrate art, design, culture, and technology, and how we can empower positive relationships. I think that's something we really believe in as we review back and look forward. We've had this diagram presenting today. We'll share our 2006 first ever project together. We'll share some overlay and journeys on the curatorial program Sue was hinting at, 2009, that was quite seminal in the way we think. Then along the way, we've had some really fascinating opportunities with non-for-profit projects, and also a lot of experimental works, writing, media, filming, as you said, and also how we can actively shape this area and also region through pedagogy and practice. So we were founded actually in New York in 2005, and back in the good old days, I suppose I grew up in Hong Kong. I'm from Hong Kong, and Eric will always joke when we first met back in 2001. This is more than 2 decades ago. We already started talking about Hong Kong, about the region, education, and something he probably never reveals is his thesis at Cornell was also on Hong Kong. And also, my sort of academic interest has always been looking at community building. And so there's something really interesting just to have things build upon each other and how our roles take different, and they transform over time. Yeah. So we'll share a wide range. It'll be a really exciting, I hope, a visual overload. We are also parents, and we run and juggle so much. We have complex Excel sheets and Google calendars.
Multiple calendars.
So we're just joking again earlier. We haven't sat together in a very long time like this. But the notion of interactions in communities, the reason why we share this statement since 2003 is something we hold quite truly, and happy to share our first project together. We do and have been looking at Hong Kong as a main laboratory of expression, a space of generosity, engines of culture, and how we actively can play a role in that. We've been really, obviously myself growing up, one of my first summer jobs as a teenager was working in the housing authority, doing public playgrounds, drawings, and being in awe of this woman architect and a series of architect role models. So looking back at this project that we presented, thinking about housing typologies, how they've changed, how we've grown up in different situations, And because of Eric's background, originally from Maine, he always jokes his town is 400 people. And obviously it's
no joke, it really is.
It is really 400 people. And whereas in Hong Kong, one floor of a commercial building could easily host that density in a skyscraper. So we come from very different backgrounds, but with a real shared interest to have social impact and cultural change in situations we see ourselves in. And one of, this slide also represents education, participation. This is back in 2007-8. Young academics at ESKYIU, we got our TAs involved. We partnered with, at that time, the NGO I was serving on the board. We had the university, shopping malls. We worked with 400 youth children around the city to reimagine what Hong Kong could be. And this was already back in 2007, 2008, 2009. Lego brick by brick, kind of knitting together different demographics to come together to participate in building the city. So yeah, just wanted to share a few kind of opening slides and poetically share our first collaboration together. Chinatown Work 2006, which we've also been very pleased recently in the last 2 years, has joined the M+ collection. So we haven't really shared too much on this news, but happy to discuss this part of our background. And Chinatown Work is quite a special project, although it's our first real public art architectural installation. It does weave together a series of urgent topics on my interests, Eric's interest on technology, my interest in community building and humanism and connections, fragility of neighborhoods, to all sorts of topics that weave into this. So do keep in mind this project is situated in New York. And at that time, I was also a practicing very junior architect working at KPF, which I learned a lot there. We were doing a lot of different types of projects. Everyone was in different backgrounds, but as a non-for-profit project on the side, we were really interested in the effects of Chinatown once the September 11th hit. There was a lot of discussion, a lot of questions about labor, Chinatown. We were living in a very different era at that time. A lot of places were affected by this very particular moment in time in history and politics in one sense. But at the same time, there was a lot of revitalization happening in 2006. So this kind of engendered this ongoing project since late 90s, and also as a graduate student, focusing on the Global Assembly and my interest in factories and Chinatowns around the world. And Eric's really interesting background in technology, formerly working with people like ESKYIU, even before Liz was doing all the build work, looking at animation, media. So what we're sharing here today is a culmination of a very layered, complex project, but at the same time has, a really great sense of how we saw the Lower Manhattan community rebuild itself, and perhaps as we reflect today where we are, how it connects to Hong Kong post-pandemic. So this project is, it's really fascinating. It was located, we got this amazing fund, community fund, Lower Manhattan Cultural Council Commission. We were exploring and for a while filming a lot of factories. There were about 500 in Lower Manhattan that were affected post September 11th. This is a studio where Eric, his first New York studio, we were working on mapping creating and weaving and testing materials to map the transformation of the Lower Manhattan cultural area of Chinatown. We were very interested at that time to build community. So we created this really fascinating interactive multimedia real-time space that showed footage of a lot of factories and garment industries to restaurants to how people worked over time, and had an interactive screen where you would pass and see your silhouettes weave between interior spaces and exterior spaces. So we can show a little short video while we're talking, but it sort of sets the stage because although this is down in a Bowery branch, the HSBC facade, we were working already on using and thinking about the apparel chains, the global economy, physical labor spaces, and at the same time, post 2001, 5 years later, how do we come out of a very tough situation and celebrate the extraordinary community of New Yorkers at that time when we were practicing. Yeah.
So there's a interior and exterior. The exterior was the normal condition. And if there was no one in front of the screen, it would just have only the exterior condition. But so much of Chinatown is about what's happening on the inside, right behind the facade that no one could ever see. And so Marisa filmed in a lot of the spaces on the inside. And then as people pass in front of the green screen, their own body then allows, once the bodies are assembled and people come together physically in front of the installation, can you see the labor unfolding within it? And that in many ways mirrored what was happening after 9/11 in New York as well, where there was an economy that had been closed off below the Bowery because they had to repair and reconstruct the whole neighborhood and actually spend months and months cleaning the area. So no one could actually enter the area. And then because workers couldn't enter, they lost their jobs. And then because people lost jobs, they lost the business. And so there's, again, this condition between what you could see from almost a distance in the exterior and what was actually happening within the interior. So Chinatown work, it illustrated that within the street of Manhattan. So as you had the site below, there's actually a green screen, which in this photo doesn't really illustrate what actually happens in the eye of the camera. And the eye of the camera is actually a very green, even screen. And then the screen above, if you gather enough people together, it reveals what's actually happening within the inside.
Yeah. So these are just diagrams to explore, and you can see how technology has changed. We actually had to convince a lot of people to work with us in the community to film factory spaces, restaurants. We had to also encourage, I still remember this amazing individual at the accountant across the 4-lane, 6-lane traffic. And the next slide here. And we had to work with Wi-Fi technology, figure out all the real-time processing software to control the mask images and identify motion of passerbys. And we had this really extraordinary celebratory moment with some of these factory workers coming by to actually see themselves projected. So it's been a really extraordinary process, and you can see, although this is on the Bowery on the HSBC facade, technically, first time it's never been introduced to art and architectural public art installation. So when we think about the role of the designer, architect, or community space along those years from 01 to 06 when we launched that, we were already really believing we should keep on going to explore and research these questions of labor and culture and community building. And during that time, I was volunteering a lot with the revitalization Lower Manhattan Asian American quality groups. Eric was doing a lot of performative experimental art. We were doing a lot of competitions. We were doing a lot of, just participating in a lot of extraordinary moments during New York at that period of time.
So we should convince HSBC, now that they have a mediated facade at HSBC in Hong Kong, we should convince them to replay this, because it's just collected by M+, so I think the timing is perfect. Maybe for 2026, we could do a repeat as well.
Yeah. And the precursor to this, we were just going to share two very short projects that led to Chinatown work, 2006. And because of, growing up in Hong Kong, watching this extraordinary, amazing city of ours transform itself, I was really, really enamored by also how economy, how, social spaces, cultural spaces, what I call behind the label, like spaces of labor, begin to contextualize. So I was actually, my academic thesis was looking at global factory conditions. So from mid-90s, late 90s, I would watch Dongguan transform, I would go film. I was really interested in Hong Kong Power of the Delta relationship already back in the day, and looking at how materials are assembled, perhaps that kind of more cultural network, how people are living in dormitories to working in one sense, a really efficient and transformative way. These are my very old photos I was digging out earlier today, looking at, spaces of production. This is in North Dongguan. Does not look like this today, but a huge complex. I was like filming and photo taking spaces of mass production, and really interested in Hong Kong's relationship with Power of the Delta and its transformation. So I've been really looking at a lot of these ideas and concepts. And Brand Spider was a culmination of both my academic Masters of Architecture thesis at Princeton. I was very lucky to get a scholarship, so I know how important education is. And really, along the way, having these amazing advisors kind of shape in dialogue and mentor myself. And when I graduated in 2001, we can just show this video. This project in 2003 was selected to be shown in 2002 alongside Mark Lombardi, like a lot of really fascinating artists, designer, architects at the Whitney Museum ISP show. So this was an interactive interface I was creating with some earlier software that doesn't exist, but mapping relationships of where things are made all over the world, with clothing, with networks, how we are connected through the global assembly of production. So that's the kind of first project of ESKYIU that I also wanted to share. Precursor.
So not the first project.
But also, how do things actually interweave is actually quite fascinating. And so this interface was something I was, still to this day so intrigued by, and how social relationships, and whether we're connected or interconnected, somehow the kind of world of cultural economy is very connected spatially. So, and then Eric, 2003.
Aladdin was a project I worked on actually in 2002, but the performance itself was in 2003. And it was developed by the London-based Mote Roti and the Builders Association in New York City. And Aladdin draws on the lives of people in global cities such as New York, London, Bangalore, where each city and each culture collides in both the material and virtual worlds. And the play itself that I had worked on was the story of Aladdin, and it became a vehicle for the collision of these cultures. Since the story of Aladdin had been told many times, revised by each culture, and then retold again. So the narrative has traveled across Asia to India, to England, to America, and each culture that touches the story actually borrows it, reinterprets it along the way. So today, the interaction of culture continues. And so metropolises blur the line between identities, between people, and reflects how each culture adopts and reinterprets each other. And this play was looking at the personal transformation of each of the characters in the play. And it was focusing on the Bangalore call centers. So telemarketing centers where you call in and learn how to communicate. So what was happening with the people who worked there was they're learning how to pass as Americans because the people on the other end of the line thought they were talking to an American, and they had to learn how to neuter their mother tongue, or you simply couldn't get a job. So the operators in these call centers, again, this is 2003, so now a lot is done on the internet, but in those days, a lot was done just picking up the phone call with someone. And so these operators are actually, they impersonate all the cultural habits of Americans, even though almost none of them had ever stepped foot in America. And it just made it easier to communicate with the other person on the other end of the phone. So some of the operators in these call centers would even have colloquial American expressions. They would speak with a perfect English accent with a perfect like Texan drawl that even I can't imitate as well, being an American. And it just made the communication easier, but it would also blur how the culture transformed. The directors of the play actually traveled to Bangalore and spent months in these call centers. And the area that I had actually worked on were two interludes in the play. And the first one was within New York City, and the second one was in London. And in this sequence, this was the backdrop for the play. But in the sequence, there was an actress who was American, but with Sri Lankan heritage, who had been raised in Hong Kong. And she would flip in the play between Cantonese, British English, Spanish, and just chatting with her friends. So this is a rather long interlude, so maybe I'll speed it up a little bit and just jump to different places. But basically, it reconstructed in the same exact timing and sequence, different places. So this was the New York City buildup, and then there's another buildup that was of London of the same time. So illustrating these different places in the cultures that are fused together within these places as well. So this is just another aspect of how we frame our work, and actually how we often think about the culture that we work within and the social actually impact that we might have by offering new work into the world as well.
Yeah, and so, we have this, opportunity, we've seen Chinatown work. We had this really kind of special opportunity to take all this interest of ours into a teaching studio, actually, at the Architecture Association. So that was when Eric was also working really hard on his PhD at Cambridge, UK, looking at the archive of the Eames. At that time, I was also wrapping up my licensing, was doing a lot of projects with my kind of corporate life at KPF. I really respect that whole community and amazing architects. So ended up taking a break from that and moved to London and taught this really fascinating studio, looking at, again, global economy, culture, Hong Kong, in response to how we can really begin to think about sustainability and self-engendered spaces, right? So we're teaching this really amazing international group of students. And towards the end of 1 year, we ended up working with a really amazing group. This is back in 2007, I believe, right? 2007. You can see the materials in Chinatown work we had was looking already when we were sewing the mapping, the textiles, weaving with some collaborators in New York. At that time, 3Form was testing new eco-resin. So we had formed a very strong relationship with this company. And again, thinking about issues of, whether it's farming, factory self-sufficiency, efficiency of resources, where do things come from? Could we test and create an installation that tested what we called an aeroponic facade and called it nutritious? So after a year, and what we proposed, is it actually moving? was really looking at working with creating a self-sustaining system. And oh my gosh, I was just joking earlier with Eric. It's like, we definitely look very young. This is like a long time ago. And, you know, there's Dorset, you know, testing how to bend materials. That's myself with a student. Eric working on new scripting technologies, 2-week intensive. Met and talked a lot about, you know, hydroponics. We knew aeroponics was just beginning, you know, with the NASA technology. So how do we put together this testing idea with collaborators, technical advisors, to produce something quite special in London as part of the final show, and culminated into you know, how to use materialities and bending, creating you know, this is even now everyone uses all the software, testing and growing organic strawberries to bok choy.
This is all the recycled
and recycled waste. So this is already
completely recycled waste. All our shampoo bottles and other things formed into a material, and then the material is CNC'd, trying to maximize also the usage of the material as far as we could, in order to eventually make what was then the bench through these like slices that became the bench of the project as well.
Yeah. So these are earlier tests. How do we use a aeroponic system, which is a misting system, to grow? And it was quite a beautiful project, how things could be dismantled and not discarded and wasted. And this ethos continues. Again, our roles have diverged since our earlier days, but a lot of ethos in what we're doing, whether it's fabrication, you know, CNC cutting, testing new materials, testing, pumping to create and grow, led us to, you know, an invitation in the end to join and represent Hong Kong in the Venice Biennale. This is now in the Venice Biennale Hong Kong Pavilion, which, if I recall, this was also shown at the Heritage Discovery Center. So 2008, again, just looking at the roles of the past projects, you know, the kind of softness, the planting. We were very much inspired by a relative of mine who's been in Hong Kong publishing, and he's an urban garden guerrilla who published this book called Urban Gardening. Guerrilla gardening.
Exactly.
So 3.5 meter plot of land he could grow and sustain for his family to have salads. And so a lot of this kind of research is really through survey, interviewing, prototyping, testing these material again, looking at the transformation of life cycles, looking at these Italian genetics when we're presenting in the Venice, rosemary, but then thinking about local climate and culture. And of course, the most important is the audience, which is future builders or future community members that we've been engaging. And so this ethos, that was 2008. Eric and I and Alan, a dear friend, and also Frank Yu, someone we fully respect in the architecture world, were interested in expanding on these concepts. So earlier in the introduction, you can see we've been very active in that kind of cultural ecosystem building for Hong Kong, on Hong Kong, often promoting other people and being curators. You tend to think of your role in a way, how do you communicate the best of the world or city? And that's something we do see this as another very seminal first type of project. Again, this photo I took from the ICC Tower. I'm timing myself, so we should have a few more minutes.
And only 3 more slides.
And looking back down on West Kowloon, oh my gosh, we had to convince the authorities to allow us to use a larger piece of land. We worked with amazing committees from Hong Kong IA. We had actually also AIA people involved. We had to work for LCSD, bureaus, and we were only originally given the West Kowloon waterfront site, but managed to build this concept of city mobilization, opening up architecture and design to the community and testing it with the community. So we themed it 城市动员, 城市动员, which is like BYOB, bring your own Biennale. Everything was like, encouraging Sugarban to come join us as a Japanese architect, building the Paper 2 Pavilion, to work with all these BD architects, amazing team just to kind of question the realities of these temporary shelters, the magnificent
Building with paper.
The scene of Hong Kong, which we dearly care about. This is 2009. Eric and I, with all these other members, hosting the first public debate or discussion on the waterfront. At that time was Rocco, Foster, and OMA Architects. And actually you can see Tao Lawrence, and also Donald Choi, who's now the president of Hong Kong IA. We brought everyone together. It was freezing, 400 people on the Shigeru-ban, really talking openly about culture and our extraordinary city. And the architects, designers didn't actually have any forum to share during that process of competing against each other. So, we brought together over 80 exhibitions, bringing in first-time young architects, very well-known technologists, looking at how cables can generate wind, recyclability, working with Xu Bing, famous Beijing artists on workshops. We opened up the waterfront, even pre-Copland Flat.
Brought people
together, really interested in elderly communities and how aging should not be, compartmentalized, but how can we make them as participants. It was really amazing. Casey and Stanley going out so much, or going out
which is also being collected by M+.
Yeah, and all these amazing cultural creatives, young farmers, friends who kept coming back during the 3 months, made us very optimistic and positive about how we play a role in the city. So fast forward, I know we don't have too much time left. Besides the projects we've been doing, West Kowloon Cultural District now, M+, or Palace Museum, or Siju Center, it's a really exciting moment. And we both participate in other ways. This is also another 2013 commission. We work with New Music Ensemble. This is after the Biennale. We created some participation audio projects with musician friends, activating that site. We were also commissioned and very close with Spring Workshop, one of the most extraordinary non-for-profit art spaces in Hong Kong, and Mimi Brown invited us to create something on our own terms. And I think that's something quite special, even when we show you at the most recent built project. We've had really amazing collaborators, clients, and commissioners along the way to really trust the research and process. And industrial forest is interesting. Again, we're happy to announce this is also just entered into the M+ collection. We were originally only commissioned to do this little outdoor space for 2 years, but ended up, it was open for 5 years actually. And we wanted to challenge ourselves to create something that evoked Wangjuk, which is a yellow bamboo industrial space of Wangjuk Han. And notice that when we installed this extraordinary 4.2 meter we call it bamboo forest. It's actually made out of metallic filaments. They would swing in the wind. They would cheat nature. Mushrooms would grow in one season. We worked with the nonprofit to bring in ethnic minorities, different underprivileged communities to work and play. Unfortunately, this space doesn't exist as much, but we've been documenting a lot of these projects. And just other, pop-up spaces, participating in the Shenzhen side of the Hong Kong Biennale, glass factory. I'm the curator of Uning. This was connected back to Colombia, where we were also teaching one summer during the Biennale, and reconnecting the Shenzhen, Hong Kong side, both together quite actively, and how these spaces become activated through community building, dialogues, and cultural spaces. And I don't know if you want to share on this Climate Collective, which also takes the same ethos of a few of the projects ahead, about participation, working with different communities. We were invited by Nike to work with 5 areas in China, so Beijing, Guangzhou, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and bring 24 young artist designers with athletes together and create an expression through the open access of sport and athletics and how to empower people. At that time, I had no idea who LeBron James was, but it was just kind of nice to meet him. And having these amazing opportunities to learn from experts and the R&D innovators, we brought athletes and designers together to create works and sounds, and installed this amazing piece with Arthur Huang from Taiwan in the Beijing space, in 798. So ongoing, we've been quite active, a lot of pop-ups, a lot of different types of commissions. And, as we fast forward, the Idol Portal was also this amazing, project of working with really extraordinary human potential. These Idol Portal is a very well-known kind of kung fu martial arts to training athletes and military. And we were invited to design a campaign and also a structure to frame his beliefs of movement culture. And so we also believe in continuing activity and activation. And in 2018, we decided 10 years plus of ESKYIU practice. How could we work with and thank all the people that have helped to shape who we are in one sense?
So we were asked to do a retrospective of our work at Artistry Inspire, but instead of looking back and just putting old projects together in a room, we decided to look at how our techniques had evolved. And so what we did is we looked at older ways of thinking and then reactivated them to project it forward. So it was something that was both retrospective in terms of how we are looking, but using that in a very projective manner. Mm-hmm. And so ESKYIU Play Kits was just that. It was like how these kits came together with play at the very center of it as well. So there's performance, there's sports, there's moments of creation, music, education, and we were trying to bring together all these different facets of society and facets of way of working as well together. As part of it, in order to bring the community together, we invited participants from across Hong Kong, but also across the world, to also participate very directly. So people came up with their own interpretation of what the play kit was and sent it to us. And then we displayed them. So this is Michael Young's interpretation of the play kit. This is someone.
This is Kenrick and his team, former students of ours at Hong Kong U that we taught, who are doing really well now.
And then became this entry sequence in the wall where all the different participants were actually how you entered the space. And then once you enter the space, there was this idea of how the units came together to form a musical instrument, to form something that's within sports, to form a chair for dialogue. So the same pieces were reconfigured, taken apart, and put together again in order to serve 3 different purposes. And it was also thinking about sustainability, not just from the material use, but actually from the reuse. So you're reusing the one element and using it 2 or 3 times. So nothing goes to waste. Anything you design for the sports then ends up becoming something that was used for the dialogue, which also ends up being reconfigured and used for a musical instrument. So thinking about sustainability, both from a social aspect of the use and also from material aspect as well. One mistake that we made though is we had it transformed every single day. So that became exhausting, but also it was a challenge about how you could transform something very quickly. So a lot of the design challenges behind it was also situated about how we could think about how you could easily, in the course of a few hours, completely transform the space. And so the space would grow through time, and some were different sporting events. So there was different moments where the space would transform very easily from one sporting event to the other. And then there was an active dialogue, and due to the active dialogue, it transformed holistically, and then the musical instrument actually stretched out through the space and beyond the space as well.
Yeah, and we were very lucky to have, Artistry, the Swire team to support the space. We had our past collaborators like Nike come on board to also be a program partner, and various musician friends from the New Music Ensemble we've been working a lot with. So this was an amazing, extraordinary moment of a space like Artistry can, every day we wanted to challenge ourselves to create different communities to come together. So yoga, sports challenge. We had a women-led symposium looking at the role of women leadership. And it's just absolutely fascinating to see the head of Lina from Beijing came to our amazing, Olympic swimmer come talk and share their experiences with us.
And just a note on the sports that we chose too. We chose sports that were representative of different cultures. So yoga from one culture, ping pong from another, soccer or football from another, basketball. So each culture we also thought about what Hong Kong is and who lives in Hong Kong and who we wish to build our audience towards, and making sure that also our audience was widespread rather than just singular. Yeah. And of course, material sustainability became a very key part. So there were...
Yeah, so 56,000 pairs of Nike grind shoes were created.
Nike shoes were ground down
to create the material.
Form the material for the exhibition.
Yeah. So these are just some images just to share. You can see people were sitting on our original hurdles that then became armchairs. The basketball hoop was drawn out later to become musical instruments with technology and sensors. We had the most amazing community groups from Hong Kong coming to test and challenge themselves through how access of sports and public spaces are important. Our own little people at home came, and our new audience, but just to really see the just extraordinary ways that how space and culture and curation, if it's tested well and done well, it will benefit many different societies and different communities in Hong Kong. And that's something we do believe in. So this was kind of fun. We had one night where we wanted to test who works late. So we had midnight ping pong. All the architects and chef friends came.
Especially the chefs, actually. Yeah. I never realized, but every chef in Hong Kong showed up.
Yeah. Yeah. And had a midnight ping pong competition event with us. And, when we reflect on our past, I do think work and play and the ethics of work and play and communication dialogue really help to shape the intellectuality of a mind or research. So keeping us moving, this also represented, we have people like the head of certain communities come. We had head of curators from different parts of our community come together and debate. So we made this C-suite debate dialogue, inviting all the CEOs from different companies to sit and think about the role of work and play, artists, academics, entrepreneurs come together. And then the finale was just this beautiful piece. We worked with Hong Kong New Music Ensemble and their musician friends. We tested materials, architectural materials that became musical. And of course, we also are huge fans of, also KEF speakers. So we also had some background music. We were testing with them on material choices. Oh my gosh, this is bringing back memories. And then just fast forward, other kind of projects, we've done with the Swire Group, Art Basel, same approach, 2015. How do we make installations that frame or calm that can be also activated with view corridors to the amazing views of Hong Kong? Eric had to design a machine to create the bended plywood of the materials. And recently with our colleagues at ESKYIU, we all worked really hard together to produce Art Basel 2020 for Swire's Lounge, which was really fascinating, looking at Alison Crowther's 200-year-old wood and then having an expression of technology innovation of Stride to work. So the last kind of project maybe we can share very quickly is 2019. I suppose we were working on this for 5 to 6 years, and an amazing opportunity and commission from the New World Group. One of the most extraordinary projects we found, for our own practice, is to really write the brief together. So that was really, really extraordinary to be able to see it from a curator's standpoint, designer, learning from all the experience we've had with, use of glass, wood, testing materials in new ways, 3D printing or restoring. You can see on the far left, the old signage for the shops that were taken down, unfortunately, and repurposing that, working with the client team very closely to convince them not to discard the quarry stone. Our obsessions with nature. Unfortunately, I didn't have time today, but Eric would probably kill me. I found the 8-year-old drawing of these trees, upside down trees when you're a kid.
It's not 8-year-old drawing. It's a very, very old drawing.
When you're a child.
When I was 8.
Of how nature plays a role. So we've been really interested in also the opportunity to share this. We don't really talk about this project as much. We haven't been given that much opportunity. But this building project was extraordinary, both in experience and thinking about how office buildings, cultural spaces can perform, but also create different activities and invite different communities to participate in the use of materials throughout. Yeah, maybe you can share.
So just a few, the granite stone that Marisa was talking about, this wall was unearthed from the construction site. And so we were asked if we wanted to keep it, and of course we did. So we're using the actual material that was found on the site. And what it's marking is a street, like a street between the two sites that were fused together to form the major site of the building. And so there used to be an alley between the two building sites, and that formed one site now with the new land plot. So we are also marking that moment. And of course we wanted to communicate more. So we communicated, which I can't read, but it does communicate something.
And yeah, all the gutchans, all the Chinese textures and the history. So
just like the granite that was found on the site when they were digging their foundations, there are other moments that were also part of what had to come down in order to build the building, but we tried to hold on to everything we could and then contextualize it and bring it back into the building itself. So there's always a more firm understanding of sort of the culture of which we come from. So it isn't just about rebuilding and ignoring or forgetting. It's reminding, recalling, holding on to. And it's not about just shifting something to a museum. It's about trying to keep it in its original place as well. One other aspect that we're really thinking about for this building that we haven't put into fruition yet, because it actually launched right as COVID was dawning. And so what all these small details in the wall are screws that can come out, and then you can hang things throughout the wall. In the course of one night, you can completely transform the space. So the idea was that most buildings go 9 to 5, 5 days a week, or is a primary use. And we're thinking, how can we have the building, an office building, give back to its community? And so one way we're thinking about it is there's many spaces within the building that could be public that often aren't used by the public, but we're thinking about how we could use the lobby space as a space that transforms and the roof space as a space that transforms. So the elevator that only goes to the roof, so it doesn't have to interfere with the security of the building that's necessary. And there's a lot of innovation within the building that allows for that rapid transformation. And of course, we want to make it come to life as well. So eventually what we hope to be able to do is be the curators for our own building. So essentially that we can really transform the building how we had thought about it.
Yeah.
And we actually designed many moments within the building, and everything is really carefully hidden within the ceiling, so it's actually completely invisible. But there's things that can like hoist a huge object through the space, and is computer controlled. There's lighting that can suddenly appear or disappear. There's water that can go into the floor. So there's all these infrastructural columns where things, electricity, other aspects that you actually need as a curator can suddenly appear. And then when you don't need it, it just disappears. And so it's carefully disguised in a way with the building as well.
And we also, during that process, was fun and fascinating to convince the client team side. The lobby, you can see there's some joint lines. This is actually the freight elevator.
A hidden major huge elevator that can hold like huge trucks. So behind this wall is something actually can open up into the, and it usually wouldn't stop at the lobby, but what we wanted to be able to do is offload a very large installation that you wouldn't even be able to fit through the front door. We wanted to be able to go under the ground and then bring it up a level in order to enter.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of like sort of hidden innovation that what wouldn't normally count as architecture. I mean, it's all hidden, but we find that it's the hidden infrastructure that becomes so important because then it allows for the transformation not just happen once, but to be continuous. So this one is more fixed elements, and so this one doesn't transform. However, you can see that that will then be there for the next 50, hopefully, or more years. But the other spaces always are transforming in front of us. There's also a lot of other innovation. For instance, the idea of having bathrooms, actually you could see it in that last image. The bathroom has 3 different sink heights for the different heights of children. So it's a bathroom that is attempting to bring like families together, and it's often exhibition space. So the exhibition space, we know we want to build a wider audience. And so as a child grows, they can just reach to a different height. There's also a lot of spaces, not only for children, but for babies, and to make sure that as people are moving through the city, say with a stroller or in a wheelchair, that everything just works perfectly. And making certain that even every bathroom, every space is to the same highest standard. And there isn't like one standard for someone who is on wheels and another standard for a person who's walking. And we want to actually make sure that every space is beautifully designed for every moment of our society as well.
Yeah. So it's also adding dignity, whether it's, you know, these projects or public space projects we're doing, like how are we as active agents of, you know, transformation, really acknowledging inclusivity or diversity. So obviously you have, you know, breastfeeding rooms now for chief executives, or the inclusive handicap bathrooms. We were convincing so hard to make sure it's dignified, so it looks as nice as a luxury washroom, or the, you know, the extraordinary green field system, you know, to the heritage walls of rooftop, you know, different spaces and knowledge. And the exhibition for us was really amazing, maybe from a curatorial design artistic needs side from our earlier days, and acknowledging, you know, what the white box space. This was an amazing show the K11 team put together, and you can see how it's transforming and changing over time. So hopefully we get to do more with them, with these spaces. And yeah, just to conclude and wrap up, of course we acknowledge our practice it's very, very small. But also we do have to collaborate with a lot of different individuals, and we do acknowledge it's not just an individual kind of driven leadership. It really does take a lot of stakeholders and testing to try new things. So we're very honored to participate in this, whether they're rammed earth or initial sketches of hanging down trees, thinking about the green field, open air.
Well, so what Marisa was alluding to was a sketch that I did when I was 8, where it had like a world upside down. And so this world upside down, which I completely have forgotten about, but somehow came back into a project. So this one, we wanted to have like an upside down, like basically yard, as if it, like suburbia had ended up in the wrong place, hanging down. We couldn't get the little house that we wanted of suburbia,
and the lights.
and but we did get, and we couldn't get also grass. We wanted it to be grass, but for the Hong Kong climate, it couldn't be grass. So we were eventually looking into like a fern that could survive being hung upside down. And so, but one of the aspects of it is to really rethink about not just sustainability as something you like add, but actually how sustainability within the building, within the infrastructure gets cultivated and changes through time as well. And so we hope that almost every space then becomes greened within the city, not just the spaces that are normally reserved for parks or now becoming facades, but almost everything could actually start to build completely differently.
So just 2 slides, you know, from practice, prototyping, researching, academia, or pedagogy, we are really serious and committed to work with different communities, whether government, grassroots, developer, private, academia, public, to ensure, you know, we have a role to play through design and architecture and transforming public through platforms, and more how heritage and also interaction and innovation begin to play a role. And, you know, thank you to all of you for listening. We had an amazing opportunity to reflect. It's been very complex the last few years. ESKYIU has taken pause, it has accelerated, but is also our safe space studio where we feel quite empowered to treat it as a space to think. But while we're doing that, Eric has a really big role to play at the university, and my most recent passion and commitment is for the nonprofit Design Trust. We've been doing a lot for the community, and obviously we count on a lot of people to build that space of generosity together. So thank you so much. Yes, Sue Chang's face popped up, so I imagine the time's up.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Marisa, and thank you, Eric. That was really fascinating. We did it, you know, 240 slides in an hour. I think that was really wonderful. A lot of project, a lot of contents from where you begin 16 years ago to now. So I'm gonna first invite our audience to submit questions and comments through the chat box and Q&A. And while we are waiting for that, I'm gonna invite Paul and Evelyn to join us for a conversation with Eric and Marisa.
Hi, thank you, Sue Chang, and thanks very much, Marisa and Eric, for the amazing presentation. I'm sure we all are very interested to seeing Eric's 8 years old sketch of the upside down tree. And our first question is a little bit related to that. So the notion of practicing architecture that is beyond just the building seems to be a very core value or interest of both of you. Well, Marisa mentioned that you have actually been through the more sort of, let's say, the more conventional or traditional modes of practice, such as the Housing Authority or KPF. It's something that I very fascinated to know that where are these transformative idea come from? Like, is it something that that you are solely responding to the brief of the project, or something that is more sort of rooted to, let's say, your environments that you grew up with, or mentors, etc.? Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one thing that makes us reflect on almost everything is we come from almost 2 different worlds. And so I come from an extremely rural way of seeing life, and then moving into one of the most densest cities on earth. And Marisa grew up in this very intense environment. And so already on everything, we see the world completely differently. And through that conversation of trying to see and fuse those worlds together, I think that's where a lot of the aspects of the project comes from. And I think even though I grew up in like a very rural environment, it was also, there's a different type of social engagement that you have with your neighbors, or you have with the community there. And it is very grounded in knowing every single person in your community. And so it's a very different relationship you have with those around you. And I think also that sense of sort of responsibility that we have to one another finds its way into the projects as well. And not just from my perspective, but also from Marisa's perspective, because the sense of community that you have within different areas within Hong Kong also comes together. But then it's how do you activate those moments? And I mean, I think we find that through architecture, you can do and make a change into the world that then activate something that if you didn't make that change, it wouldn't be activated otherwise. And fortunately, we've had very great clients. And so they are very active in this conversation as well. So when we are asking questions, they're then allowing us a space or creating a space in some cases to answer those concerns. And many of the projects too, there had to be a balance, like in budgets, or a balance in space, or a balance in somewhere, usually everything, that has to then be made to allow for those moments to occur. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's one of the things that when you have a good logic and strong reasoning, people can then accept it and then make that change. And of course, that's really tricky to do. And it takes a lot of negotiation in a way. But because you're negotiating, you then have to position your values as a entity.
Yeah. No, I mean, there are many, I think there's many modes along the way. So I don't know if I mean, your background rural, I think, something I probably don't share often that I do is when I was younger, I was very athletic. So I did have a really special opportunity to represent Hong Kong playing tennis as a junior player. So I would travel, and I to this day when I reflect on it, I'm like, you actually, representing and flying to Japan in the 80s, and you stay at home stays, you see how other cultures work. Sleeping on tatami mats, or sharing bathtubs of water over through generations of people, or going to Taiwan as a kid, and then also seeing Guangzhou, these spaces being open again, and going to the UK. You just start to think about how we are always learning in context with others. And when you go to these public spaces, the municipal buildings, it's so space efficient. You have, badminton transform into taekwondo, right? These sports places. And it just starts to think like, well, in Hong Kong, it's such a compact city, which is amazing. And there's a lot of public space, but what other ways can we activate by programming, or by curation, or by softness of human activation, then can the architecture interior, or the architecture city, be more responsive and transformative, right? So whether it's interactive technology, films, or we love Gary Chang. He's like our hero, like his amazing 35 square meter transforming 50 times or 40 times as a representation of what can and could be done. And there's many amazing, along the way you see things. And I think academia and education, we all have different paths or different architects that trained us, or we look up to certain role models. And I think that is important. I think that's why we're invested in educational grant projects. I think I had my own really nice journey through Columbia and a scholarship at Princeton, sitting next to Liz Diller or Laura Kurgan, my amazing advisor, who taught me so much. So you start to see it's really important to have these opportunities and think about your own self in context of others.
And to create these opportunities for others.
Yeah.
So I think that's also a very important aspect of what we think about is how to create opportunities for others and not just for ourselves.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I wanted to follow up with that question. So I know both of you are really active in the architectural field outside of your own practice as ESKYIU. So Eric at HKU and Marisa with Design Trust. Was that a conscious decision on your part to kind of take on really separate engagements outside of your practice, or did it just develop organically?
Was it conscious?
Oh gosh, that's a tough one. I mean, I have to admit, I mean, it's quite layered. And I was teaching at Chinese University. I loved working with Professor Pui Peng and Nelson were amazing, really big supporters. But I think I was also, at that phase where, family, you have to think about many different complexities. But I think my heart was really doing projects in the public realm and testing that. So I was already serving and volunteering on the board of the Design Trust, which is Hong Kong Ambassador Design since 2007-8 already, doing a lot of those projects I showed earlier. Whether it's, oh my gosh, when you think about it, hosting these dialogue programs, even pre-Detour, when Detour was not so formalized, with a lot of amazing individuals in Hong Kong. There was this idea of like, how can you build something as like a moment of epiphany, I suppose, 2013, 14, 15, that era. What can we do, or what could I do, or what can we do in different routes and test that? So I did make a decision more, and I will take a break from teaching, and really wanted to grow this non-for-profit space as a neutral space to bring people together. And it's still ongoing. It's not easy, but academically, I don't know, Eric, if you want to answer. It wasn't that conscious, but we still have overlays and overlaps in that sense, yeah. But you can talk about all the new programs you've been bringing on board. So he does it through education side, and then I do it through the nonprofit side. Yeah. But the same goal in that sense, right?
I mean, I think we identified changes that we want to see in the city, or we hope to see, and not like specific changes to change this or that, but like changing the baseline infrastructure to allow for new possibilities. And I think that becomes a conscious decision about how to instrumentalize that change, that system of change. And sometimes it's something one can do with a project, but then other times it's not down to one person, and it really needs like a wider platform. And so I think teaching and also growing sort of the Department of Architecture has allowed for that opportunity to see what might be missing in the city, and that could be provided for, and then laying the groundwork for that future change. And hopefully those changes, you might not see it in the first year or two even, but those are changes you hope to see that have an impact, 10, 20 years down the line. And although we often think in like short durations of time, sometimes we're thinking in quite long durations of time. Like, what impact might we have in 10 years time if we make a decision now, today? How do we want to see that change eventually come about? And I know that's a really sort of abstract answer, and not really tangible. But one of the more tangible aspects is we started a program in design, where at Hong Kong U, where half of the credits are in design, and the other half of the credits are anything but design. So the students will take a second major, basically. And through that second major, they'll learn either finance or legal side, or they'll learn engineering or philosophy. And then they'll bring that back into the design. And so that cohort of class then has people who know something about philosophy, something about engineering, something about mathematics through their classmates. And that tension, when they're thinking about something, allows a wider spectrum of possibility of answers. And so the idea behind the program isn't to benefit any one student. It isn't just like the philosopher designer or the engineer designer, but that through those different people coming together results in something that we wouldn't have seen individually. And I think a lot of our work is thinking about the social condition that you can create. And then through that social condition, then it sparks new things going on around. And I think there's a lot of evidence that that works quite well, that it does create completely new possibilities that weren't there before.
Yeah. So, yeah, I suppose we're constantly engaged, but for, you know, I know Paul and Evelyn are very involved in our nonprofit too, but how do then these testing grounds like the Design Trust Future Studio mentor-mentee think tank has been like a real sincere commitment on my part to work with many stakeholders and bring them together. So obviously it started in 2017 and now we're 2022 and we're finally seeing, you know, micro parks being built. We have been very interested in the role of Hong Kong in the Greater Bay Area. You know, how does heritage and identity play a role? Can design go cross borders? There's so much division in our world today, but I do believe, you know, through dialogue and these kind of cross-cultural exchange projects, we can bring people together, and that's the fostering of minds. Yeah, I mean, Sue was talking before. Sue Chang was recently involved in my latest Design Trust Future Studio project with some of our colleagues, looking at heritage and generation, working with masters. Technically, you might not have access to, but by putting the right people together, that always seems to catalyze something greater beyond yourself. So yeah, it's been amazing, right? So just to see you strike a friendship with Cynthia, this amazing Milano, Hong Kong sculptor, and learn different craft, and then engaging in the Hong Kong Palace Museum and understanding that side of heritage and culture. So yeah, it's very broad stroke, this conversation. I hope that answers the question. Yeah.
Yeah, no, so, like you brought up the Future Studio, and I think the micro parks is a great example of design working with different timescales. That, you know, like having visited the parks and also like heard participants talking about the whole process, that it's much more than the design of the actual park, but then talking to different stakeholders and then trying to impact the design of the park at a policy level. You know, a lot of the, I think, challenges and limitations of the actual design of the park does kind of go back to the actual policy of how parks are initiated, how parks are managed and run. So yeah, I think that's something that we observe in projects all the time. How, aside from design, what are different, let's say, changes that can be made at different levels of, you know, how these projects are run.
And that's what we often talk about. I mean, when we're talking about a project or a design, we're often talking not about the specific nuts and bolts, although we do, but also more like the dinner conversation when we're not in front of our computers would be about the changes that we might want to see in terms of policy change or a change in mindset.
Yeah, so the microparks are a great example. I mean, it's quite humbling to be able to knit together grassroots government, designers, stakeholders. You know, 2018 was the kickoff. Now we've built 2 parks, right? One in Xinwan district, old neighborhoods, some underprivileged areas. We're rolling out another 2 shortly. But the good news is there was a policy address about our 4 microparks with another nonprofit and 2 and playwright to help accelerate how the LCSD, which is equivalent to the Parks Department in the US, how, you know, the next 170 play spaces in Hong Kong, they're committed in the next few years to revitalize. So it's all win-win, right? And then you have the West Kowloon Cultural District happening. And so it does take kind of big scale, small scale public spaces to work together. Yeah, so that answers.
It's actually very interesting questions from the audience. So amazing to see you achieve so many experiments through fun projects of various forms. Any suggestion for a new starter in quote typical architectural practice? So this one is from I guess a young architect working in an office. Yeah.
Come join us. I don't know. I mean,
so
yeah. Why don't you go first?
I always had this philosophy,
Yeah.
which was, so I almost always taught my whole life. And so even right when I graduated, I still had some opportunities to teach right after. And even when I was studying, I was teaching, I was a TA for multiple courses, or teaching in some cases, multiple courses. And I always have philosophy when I graduated that I'd spend 1/3 of my time working, like working in an office or working, and I had my own office, 1/3 of my time teaching, and 1/3 of my time doing just something else. And that's something else, like all the, like the Aladdin's, the other projects, there's Jet Lag I did with ESKYIU. There's always something just on the side. I think that's something, that 1/3 something else is really vital, that you give yourself space and time to do it. And because it was my own office, I could take a day off from my regular work and just do something else for another day. But I think that's where a lot of innovation happens. And I know Google has the 20% time as a concept. And before I ever heard Google doing the 20% time, which is 20% of your time just doing whatever you want, nothing for Google, but just whatever you want. And that's where almost all of Google's innovation comes from, is that 20% time that anyone can just do whatever project they want. That's where actually all of Google's innovation, not all, but almost so much of Google's innovation comes from that freedom that they give 1 day a week. And that was also a freedom I gave myself. And you actually always have to take it. Like you can't, no one's gonna give you that time. You actually have to carve away that time for yourself. And I still do it. I mean, it's a really complex, there's a lot of things we're working on. There's a lot of complexity to all the things we're working on. We never have enough time. But there's still moments in my schedule I literally just block out that time so I can think, so I can take a step back and reconsider. So I think that if you wish, I mean, it's also the word fun projects is also, the word fun is also important in that. That if you're doing something that you are carving away from the rest of your life in order to do, if you don't have enough time in your life, which I don't think anyone does, then it should be fun. It should be enjoyable. It should be something that we want to do rather than we're forced to do. And then when you're doing something that you find enjoyable, usually that same joy goes out to other people. So the easiest way to do something enjoyable is to make sure that you share that joy as well. So I think that those aspects is carving some time for yourself, even when it's hard or almost impossible to, and finding that big moment. That would be my advice.
Yeah, I would think, I suppose maybe that's why DTFS, the Future Studio, or granting projects.
Design Trust Future Studio.
Yeah, I think the granting projects, the C grant system that we set up was for, we've all been young. When we first started, we always wanted to get grants to support publication or experimental projects. So building up the NGO space was a way to say, well, come on, we can do this all together. There are ways and avenues. So apply for grants, test ideas. And, I think you're right, carving out your me time is as important as, time for work. So I think that work ethic, play ethic is important.
I also often saw grants as that excuse as well to be able to do a project. So if you get, the $50,000 is real money. So it's real money that goes in a project, but like the amount of time you put into that $50,000 project will be worth way more than the 50,000. But what it is almost an excuse to yourself that you have this grant, you have this responsibility, and then you actually, because you have that responsibility, you have to answer the responsibility. And therefore, you have to carve out that time to be able to do the responsibility. And so I find that the grant process isn't just about the award of the finances to allow for something to happen. It's actually about the award of the excuse so you can take time out of your other things to do the project. So it's as much as the excuse to be able to find the time that's as important as the money itself. And that's why things like design trust are so important, is because if you have a society where you don't have that excuse, and you don't have that little bit of capital that you can build something, then things simply don't happen and people aren't actively thinking about it. And say for any one grant that's given, there's 5 other ideas that people have that they need to refine in order to get the grant. At least it has the 4 other people thinking, even if they didn't get the grant. And often the words that we try to give back when we're doing the vetting for the grants is to give back encouraging words to say, like, maybe you want to reconsider this and this, and then refine it here and here, and then it can lead further. And it's often that type of that we have in teaching, but also as a mentor to people who are just joining teaching as well, like trying to find not like the perfect solution to anything, but to find like moments of refinement that you can offer.
I think probably also
I have to say we are also a very fortunate receiver of one of the C grants, and it definitely really got us initiated on the idea of like what we are interested and the sort of work that basically a lot of the work that we do now actually sprung off from the research too. So yeah, I think that definitely is change, like change that you are talking about too, like there are all these new ideas that you're not so sure, but then with the support it really propels you and give you momentums.
Well, one other thing we found, which was really unusual, was we were given a small amount of money that we were able to like double or triple with another grant. And then because we had 2 grants, we were able to convince all these companies to give us things for free. And because we're legitimized by having awarded a competitive grant, and they knew it was like the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council, so it was a real entity that gave the grant. I think a lot of other companies felt very secure in helping us with like in-kind donations and other aspects. Yeah. So I think it's that aspect where that really like quadrupled the grants in many ways as well, which I think is really important too.
And it's just resource sharing, right? If the new norm is collective resource sharing, then how can we do it together? And there are many ways around it. So I think that's something we've been continually exploring through our own studio, but also with all our other partners and initiatives. Yeah. So thank you. Are there lots of questions?
Yes,
are we being recorded? I'm really looking at it.
I think we have a couple questions in the Q&A. Maybe I can just read them. Or maybe also to continue our previous discussion about thinking and during practice. There's this question about the relationship between research and projects for you in your practice. How important is it? What's the motivation of researching? How do you choose, in quote, the topic? Do you aim at building something in the end, or mostly conveying idea through projects?
Yeah, I mean, we're quite difficult. We are very process driven, but it's actually quite fascinating when you actually see the outcome. Say whether it's the K11 interior project, it's very precise, right, in the geometries and detailing. But it just really depends. I suppose that's why this whole conversation on the first project series was very hard for us to unpack which is the true first project, as each project seems to be in itself a collective brief, right? So although, yes, some are commissions or we cook them all up. For example, the ESKYIU play kits is something we self-identified, or the Biennale installations. It's very much a question, a research question, or a test on the material that we wanted to try. So I don't know, maybe I'm being a bit convoluted, but I do think it's a lot of it is really much a brief that is a collective brief and conversation. And then find the best way to bring in the communities to be empowered or inspired by when they use those spaces in a positive way. I think that's been a deep interest. But again, I think the play, when we wrapped up play as a notion, is something we're actually hoping to eventually produce our own book on. Has been a real moment of interaction, right? Since the Chinatown work in terms of physical interaction and labor, but also the role of the identity and heritage in the city of Hong Kong as a starting point in itself has so much richness. And obviously the innovation on how we can compact resources together in many ways. Yeah, so I don't know if you have responses to that.
I always find the word research is a really curious word, because I always find it's almost this search is really the important part of the word research, and re implies that you're doing it again. But I never find that I'm doing it again. I always find that I'm only searching, not researching in a way. And the search is actually something that I'm compelled by. Like, I want to learn more. And if I only stop with what I know, then it's very limiting. And so I want to always be searching in whatever I do. And so that's where why the concept of research enters our work. I mean, I'm only speaking for myself,
Yeah.
but I think we both feel that, is that if we find that we have the answer, that's when we'll probably be dead. Because so we always have to be like actually moving forward in order to be alive, in a way. And that's where the concept of research or the search comes from, not the research, but the search comes from. And I feel compelled by it. Like, it's not like it's you sit down and you decide you want to do research. It's that there is no other choice. You can't move forward in the project unless you actually are searching a little bit deeper about something.
And it is the curiosity. So I'll give an example, since he's sitting right next to me. During the intense COVID situation, Eric started
disappearing.
Using, yes.
I took my 30% time and I expanded it to like 90% time.
Yeah, and he was like making these sensors at home, like opening windows, testing ventilation, and then writing papers. So that's the other side we're not talking about. But I think it's that maybe initiation if you want to help. And I don't know.
Boxes of things.
Yeah, so whether it's thinking, I don't know, if we are successful from my other side, if we can write a white paper on parks and policy, or we can improve, housing situation through other means, or, what can we do to bring, amazing designers like yourself to have a platform so we can all collectively make change.
So we all can be searching.
Yeah, so I think it's that curiosity and tinkering side that keeps us going, and using the mind and hands, and just always asking questions. Yeah, I think my team members probably think it's quite annoying that I'm always on the search too, and challenging ourselves to say, why can't we do it this way? Why is the government doing something this way? Or why is this community designed this way? Or what can we do to change that? It's just, in one sense, an innocent question that then motivates us to work together. Yeah.
Great. I think we have one more question for tonight from Florence, and then we'll wrap up. From Florence Chan. Hi, Marisa and Eric. Thank you so much for sharing your journey. Your works and contribution to Hong Kong design scene are very well respected. And you two are such inspirational figures for a lot of young designers. Are there any role models or mentors you have in your career? And what did you learn, or what was the inspiration for you?
Oh gosh. Oh, are you sharing this? No, right? I mean, I have to say it's not one. I think it's many. Gosh, I mean, if we had to pull out, I mean, definitely undergraduate side, leaving Hong Kong and arriving in New York City and just being exposed to, high academic levels or even at the graduate school at Princeton, being exposed to just the most amazing minds. I mean, it's kind of coming back. People like the Liz Dillers, the Mark Wigleys, that there's Laura Kirk. I mean, there's many, even as younger, as mentioned briefly, luckily was interning at Housing Authority, and I was like drawing these Escher spaces, and this amazing woman architect just blew me away, or art teachers, family that teach you how to be completely diplomatic. My mother and father, very even kill. Then you have these amazing role models along the way in Hong Kong that you come across, whether they're just serving others and you're like, wow, or working in a nonprofit. There are many like leaders of West, like M+ Last Nifty, I think he was just amazing. Curators that we've come across the way. Writers, there's many. Yeah, I don't know. I could do another one on 200 slides and 3-hour lecture on mentorships I had. And then obviously, Eric is my feeder.
So even before we actually did, when did we do the project with Damien?
Yes.
What year was that?
So that was Center for Urban Pedagogy. I was also volunteering and helping.
Around
another nonprofit.
2002.
Maybe, yes. And then of course the EAMS, right?
So there is a project actually
that brought us.
Now that you say it, there was actually a project before Chinatown work that I just somehow skipped our minds.
Yeah, that's true.
That was, I think we did it in 2002. And in that project, it was we were asked to do like a film. And one of we have a lot of experience in film, so that was no problem. But one person gave us an EAMS film and showed it because we had been working in the film. We'd showed them, and they said, "Oh, that's very similar to something that EAMS had done," and gave us the EAMS film. And that was around 2002. And I had seen Powers of 10, but I hadn't seen any other EAMS film. But it was so captivating. I still remember it was a DVD. I still literally remember putting in the DVD player. I have a horrible memory, so anything that I remember is must be very important. So I literally remember putting the DVD player, pushing play, sitting back and watching it, and then just watching the same film. It's a very short film, and just watching it 5 times in a row. But the reason I mentioned that is because when you're talking about a mentor, it isn't mentor, but a role model, definitely. And the logic was it was also that moment of research and search. Once I saw the film, I knew there was way more to that film than just what you can casually see within the first 2 minutes. And then I started to immediately sort of dig around to know much more about the EAMS. And then it led to my master's degree, it led to a PhD, it led to a book. And it's actually still something that I'm working on now. And that's 20 years later. And that's definitely an involuntary, I didn't sit down and want to do a PhD. I needed to carve the space in order to better understand that one film. And it was completely involuntary response, almost like a visceral response to something. And I find that's actually the really powerful role of a role model or a mentor in that sense, is that it's not what they say or do. It's actually how you react to what you interpret that they're thinking. And I think that act of interpretation is really vital to the process as well. So it's as much as the mindset that the person who is observing as it is the mindset of the person who's trying to set an example.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah.
So we're continually being mentees and mentors. That's my mantra too. Design trust, mentor becomes mentee, mentee becomes mentor. So it's a dialogue.
Blurred relationship.
Yeah. I think that's the most
continuous blurred.
We learn from the old and we learn from the young. We learn from all of you. Yeah.
And building that community for relationship and connections, I think that's really the thread that we've been looking at throughout the presentation. Thank you so much, Eric and Marisa. It's a little bit late. I hope our audience enjoyed it, and thank you all for the questions, and thank you, Paul and Evelyn, for joining us and moderate the conversation. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
You.
Take care.